What we have with us today here is the Vivo X50 Pro, and it's been in the market for a little over a month now, I think. And I really want to spend my time with this phone because it's a perfect example of how smartphones can be more than just specs and numbers and benchmarks and whatnot. So I have to say, the Vivo X50 Pro is one of the most unique and interesting mid-range smartphones out there in the market that I have ever used. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk about is the cameras. So there are a lot of ads on Facebook that are talking about the same thing. This phone has a gimbal built in. And so that is what caught my interest with this phone. I spent most of my 1 month with this phone on the video mode. So before we begin, this is a quick list of all of the camera specs that came along with the phone. And I'm only going to focus on the main camera mostly. But before we begin, obviously we have to talk about the photography aspect of this phone. I would say that the pictures come out okay. The colors are kind of okay, but the dynamic range is sort of weird. The darker parts are crushed really hard, so you can see the contrast is just a bit too strong. But overall, I would say that the colors are quite flat, but the night mode actually does wonders as seen in this comparison photo here. As for the ultra-wide angle camera, it's kind of disappointing. The patch of grass will just become a blob of colors like what we've seen on many other smartphones. And then there are also two more zoom cameras on this phone. One of them is a periscope lens, whereas another one is just a standard prime lens but with a longer focus distance. Those are the two lenses that I rarely touch, but it's there if you want it, and it can take kinda amazing photos too. So now back to the main highlight of this phone, that gimbal-like stabilization. I'm not too sure how I'm going to tell you how it feels because it's something that you really need to get your hands on to know how it actually feels. And I'm not even going to read any of the specs or any technical data because I just want to try it out. So immediately I fired up the video mode and woo! This phone is, yeah, it really stabilizes like a gimbal. And you gotta be kidding me because everything just works so well. At first, I didn't know what to expect. So I don't even know what I'm looking for, but well, it works very well and the whole experience really just feels like a gimbal. And I didn't have to fiddle around any settings to get the gimbal working. I just open up video mode and immediately it works. And most importantly, you can also film up to 4K 60 FPS with that gimbal-like stabilization. And all of those features are packed into just one rather small smartphone right here. So what I did was I just walked around and then filmed with that gimbal stabilization turned on, and I immediately realized that there's some artifacts like EIS. So that immediately tells me that Vivo achieved this gimbal-like stabilization by combining both software and hardware together. And I would say that's actually very smart in terms of engineering. And the phone actually displays you two different circles in the video interface. If the dot is inside the inner circle, that means the shot is stabilized and it's not going to move around. And if that dot moves outside of that first inner circle, then the camera will start to pan around to make sure that dot is inside the first circle. I don't really know how to describe it to you, but I'll just tell you that this circle is going to tell you how the gimbal is responding to your movements. And then when I start panning around, the dot will also move around according to my motion. But this thing is not perfect. One thing I realized is that when I pan quickly, at the end of that movement there, the gimbal will snap its movement to the end. It's kind of abrupt and kind of distracting too. So I would say that these kind of things can be fixed via software because it's just firmware anyway. Just calibrate the motor and everything, and then it should be good to go. But of course, Vivo have to take note of all of these issues so that it can be fixed in the first place. There's also another ultra stable mode. I'm not too sure what's it called, but it essentially kicks the stabilization into overdrive. And Vivo does this by introducing an obscene amount of crop. So what I suspect here is that they are kicking EIS into overdrive instead. And overall, I'm very impressed by what Vivo have done to the X50 Pro right here, especially the main camera with the gimbal built in. I could call it gimbal, I guess. Remember, this is like gimbal that we have here. This is the Zhiyun Smooth 4. And look at that size and all of the motors that it comes with it. Imagine this whole thing packed into just one phone. I don't have to charge a separate device, so that's good. And most importantly, if you're using the built-in gimbal-like system on the X50 Pro, you can still access the USB Type-C port at the bottom to plug in whatever you want, which is not something that can be done with this Zhiyun Smooth 4. And before I forget, the Vivo X50 Pro also has tracking autofocus, but it only works in photography mode. I'm not sure why, but I really hope that Vivo brings this motion autofocus into its video mode as well. When combined with the gimbal system, it's going to take some amazing B-rolls. And one more thing, the distinction between OIS and a gimbal is the smoothness in motion. If you're just going to hold the phone, OIS is going to do just as much of a job as the gimbal does. But the smoothness of motion, when you start to pan around, move up and down, maybe start twitching a little bit with your hands, then a gimbal will definitely outperform OIS. Okay, so now let's move on with the other aspects of the phone. So in terms of design, I would say this is a fairly simple design phone. It only comes with one color, which is alpha gray, and it is also having this matte finish here. It is a very fine matte finish that you can feel it, but yeah, it feels very smooth at the hands. And yeah, this phone is also pretty small and very nice to hold, with curvatures on both sides of the phone as well. As for the screen, the Vivo X50 Pro comes with a 6.5-inch AMOLED display with 1080p in resolution, and the colors are okay, nothing particularly wrong with it or nothing out of the ordinary as well. And I would say that is to expect with any AMOLED screens on a phone nowadays anyway. It also supports 90Hz refresh rate, but unfortunately, throughout all of the games that we tried, it is locked at 60 for all games. So I think they're using some sort of whitelist system, not too sure. And next up is the performance. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video right here, the Vivo X50 Pro is not going to top all of your benchmarks because it is packed with a Qualcomm 765G, and it is meant to be a video phone, not a gaming phone or any high-performing phone. But I'll still show you some of the benchmarks right here because I just want to make sure that I convey all of the information that I need to tell you in this review. In terms of software, when compared to another Vivo phone that I tried last year, the new FunTouch OS 10.5 is less Apple-like now. I would say that's a good thing because now it's much more familiar if you're coming in from another Android smartphone. And I would say, well, it works. It's kind of similar with all of the other UI that we use, except for Samsung's One UI, of course. And the settings menu is kind of messy, but well, that's okay, I guess. Not too messy to the point where it gets cluttered and then you get frustrated, but yeah, it could be better. And other than that, I would say that the camera app is actually better than many of its competitors out there, because you can also customize what modes do you want to display in what order when you are in the camera app. This is what Samsung introduced many years ago, and I'm glad that many other brands are following it as well. As for the battery life, I would say nothing spectacular. 4315 mAh of battery, and it can last for about 13 hours in our battery life test, which is kind of typical. As for the charging time, it comes with a 33-watt charger, and of course this phone supports 33 watts of charging as well, and it takes about 70 minutes to reach from 15 to 100% charge. So in conclusion, should you buy the Vivo X50 Pro? Well, that's a question that you have to answer yourself. I'll just help you by rephrasing that question a little bit. The question now becomes, do you take a lot of videos with your phone? Well, do you want smooth motion with your phone and take some epic B-rolls with just this little compact device here? If yes, then yeah, the Vivo X50 Pro is the only smartphone that can offer you this kind of compact size alongside with smooth motion video. It's very clear from the beginning that Vivo knows what they're doing with the X50 Pro. They are aiming for smooth video, and they are really heavily marketing on that one point alone. And I would say, well, they delivered. It's really amazing that they can fit in such an amazing system in a phone. It's not perfect, but over the long run, I really hope that Vivo push out some firmware updates to really optimize all of the system, and I'm really interested to see where Vivo will bring this technology in the future. Like we mentioned earlier, tracking autofocus is a good feature to have in video mode, but for the price of $3,199, I would say it's still a little steep. Maybe in the future this price will come down, or maybe packed with higher performing parts so I can record 4K 120 FPS, or I don't know, maybe slow motion as well. Imagine this, slow motion with gimbal functionality on a phone. It's going to be amazing. So that's all we have to say about the Vivo X50 Pro. I hope you like this video, and we'll see you next time.